the whole journey has been just something else to me. But I don't tell any of the gory stuff because it's difficult for me to even talk about it. You know, when you see some of these pictures of these men and think what they did, and they're not here anymore. And that brings back too many bad memories to me. I remember when we switched from the 8th Air Force to the 9th Air Force, why Lieutenant General Quesada addressed our group, and he says, look around you, because 85% of you aren't going to be here.
Uh-huh.
And by golly, he was pretty well right, because this was the first time that frontline support had ever really been tried, you know, and to see what we really could do with it. And you got those jackasses sitting up there in high command, and they're not going to take these missions, but they'll send you out there on them.
Uh-huh.
And I just take off my hat to everybody in my squadron, especially those who lived and went through it all.
Uh-huh.
And there's so many of them that didn't see the whole package, you know. Now, the Gruner saw everything, I guess, but the Battle of the Bulge. Mostly the pilots were just nothing but a happy bunch of boys, and you had to have this don't give a shit attitude or you'd never survived. I guess that's the reason I don't remember too much of it. that was the thing so beautiful about our squadron. We had so damn many men that were just extraordinary. I don't give it. They would have been anything. Most all of the kids, the boys in my squadron, went on and they became wonderful people of society.
Would you tell me exactly when and what the circumstances were when you first joined the 370th?
Well, the circumstances I was with the 356th Fighter Group, and I was put in the hospital with pneumonia. And no more than I got out, my group had moved. And then about the same time, a fellow got in a fight with a Navy pilot, and he crashed in Long Island Sound. And since he was a good friend of mine, I took his body. I was the escort for his body back to Oklahoma City. And then when I came back, the very next day, I was told that I was a part of the original cadre to form the 485th Fighter Squadron. And they had an office there, and I walked in, and I believe I was the 6th or 7th man to be one of the officers. My squadron commander was Seth McKee, and he went on to become a lieutenant general. Major Herrick, Captain Bill Davis. He wasn't the captain. No, he was the first Lieutenant Davis, Bill Davis. Lieutenant McNees.
Do you know about what time it was, what the date was roughly when you joined?
Oh, golly. I left advanced training and my commissioning and my wings. I was the first class in 43, and I went from there. I guess it was January, February, March, about April or May, I guess. And of course, this was at Westover Field. Prior to that, we had been doing gunnery with the 356, but I don't even recall the squadron that I was with because I lost my 201 file coming back from Belgium. And so I lost all my records, and I never did get them back again. The only records I have in my 201 file are those from the day I left Paris to come back home.
Can you kind of briefly give me an idea of what training or what all went on through that summer and fall of 43 into the winter of 43?
Well, we went through the normal phases of any fighter pilot. By that time, I had already amassed, I guess, somewhere close to 200 hours in the P-47. And we used to go up to the Republic factory and get our planes. The first time I went up, they took us around through the factory, and they called them Rosie the Riveters, And they said, well, here comes our little darlings, because they were all around 30 or 40, and we're sitting there, on our 22s. And it was the damnedest machine, I guess, that I've ever flown. I know the first time you went from 450 horsepower, to about 2,200. And when I pushed the throttle forward on that thing the first time, I got up and I just looked straight ahead, I guess, for about 5 miles, and then I got lost. We just went through the normal training then of about anything you could want to think of. Formation flying. We had to go up to, I believe, to 38,000 feet and fire off our guns and a few things like that. And while I was there, we lost an awful lot of pilots because they usually take that trip to 38,000 feet, and then they'd dump it upside down to come down. And a lot of those P-38s got into compressibility, and that's what it was called at that time. But it was really exceeding the speed of sound, because the damn thing weighed, over 7 tons. And if they'd let the airplane alone and it got down into the heavier atmosphere, why? But they lost so many pilots that Harry S. Truman, who was head of the Senate Investigating Committee, came to investigate why we were losing all these pilots. And I met him, and he talked to most of us, tried to find out as much as he could. And, of course, then we went through night flying and, out of gunnery, And we went to other little fields around there. I was at the place where the submarines were made in Groton, Connecticut. We were also on the end of Long Island Sound, Montauk Point. And we also flew some gunnery out of Mitchell Field, which was the headquarters of the 1st Air Force. I don't know. Then I guess we got ready to go up to Camp Grant, I believe, and we left right after Christmas, I think. I'm not sure of that.
What was the trip over like on the ship?
Well, the trip over was just unbelievable. We went on the 3rd largest cruise ship there was. There was the Queen Elizabeth and the Queen Mary, and this was the Mauretania. She was under Italian registry and evidently had been taken over by the British, since the Italians were in the war, And so we went over on the Mauretania. We had 14,000 men on board, and it took us about 2 weeks to go across because we took a zigzag course all the way across. There was, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of us in the real tiny stateroom. And I never will forget, they told us don't open any of the portholes. And we had a New Yorker with us. And I said, when you think we're going by the grand old lady, why, we're going to open this damn porthole. And we did. And I guess the rush of wind of everything, boy, we no more than got it closed. And here came one of the porters or whatever it was and give us hell up one side and down the other. But we did see the grand old lady.
Well, did anybody have trouble with sickness, or what were the conditions like?
We were all pilots, so it didn't bother us, but you had a sprinkler system in there,
Mm-hmm.
And we took our dog tags and tied them around that sprinkler system. And one of our men who was with us when we crossed over was our intelligence officer, and he was a former B-17 pilot. And somehow or other, he was grounded and not permitted to fly anymore. He was a first lieutenant, and he got sicker than a dog, and so did 10,000 of the other men on board. It was nothing but vomit, just any place you looked, and stink. And since it was under British rule, why, we had the usual kidneys, and heart and all those organ meats, and it was just terrible.
Well, so you finally came into England, and where did you dock?
Well, that I don't really even remember. I do remember the advance party coming to see us, and of course I was a flight commander at that time. And
what flight?
Sea flight.
Okay.
Myself and McNees were sea flight commanders. He said, Habbe, you don't know what we're going to be flying over here. And I said, well, we're going to be flying P-47. And he said, no, you're not. You're going to be flying a P-38.
What did the pilots think about that?
Well, we thought it was a big truck because they didn't have the hydraulics goosed up on the ailerons and the rudder at that time. And they just kind of sprinkled them into us. And we stayed then. I've forgotten the name of the base. But
was that at Aldermaston?
Yeah. That Aldermaston was what they called the West Point of the Royal Air Force. And the buildings were just beautifully, and the first 5 nights we had, they had a special name for these men. They came around and pressed your pants for you and shined your shoes, and we were treated just royally. And then somebody came along and said, well, we don't treat our officers like that. And we flew off of a grass field, and it was quite hilly.
Now, was this at Aldermaston or at Andover?
Andover might have been the first field we went to. I don't really recall.
I think the records say that you first went to Aldermaston, but pretty quickly moved right on into Andover.
Well, when we first came, we came to that RAF supposedly the west point of the RAF. I don't know whether it was on the way over or no more than we got over to England, why Seth McKee then was transferred to 370th Group headquarters, and Major Herrick then became our squadron commander.
When you were converting over to P-38s, what was it like? You said it was like flying a bus or something.
Well, it really was. We weren't accustomed to a twin engine, and it was, as I said, the hydraulic boost and the ailerons and the rudders was pretty tough. And we went from a stick to a wheel. And when you do aerobatics and you go from a stick to a wheel, it's just not the easiest thing to get to, right away. I guess the most embarrassing thing was when our squadron commander, Major Herrick, he came in on his first trip in the P-38, and he hit one of those little grassy hills and dumped it over.
Oh, really?
And so they kind of trickled those P-38s into the squadron, And of course, the flight commanders got them first. McNees got his first, and then I got mine. I had named mine the Washco Kid because I live in Washington County here in Illinois. Born and raised here, and so I called myself the Washco Kid, the Washington County Kid. And so then, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was Goucher who asked to use my plane one time. And I says, well, sure, you can go ahead and use it, And he went out and got in a scrap with his Spitfire, and when he come back through, he drove it through about 3 big power lines. And he cut the wings all to pieces on it. And but he came in okay, and I told him, I said, okay, buddy, this is your airplane now when my new one comes in. So I got his new airplane, and he got my old one.
He got to keep that one. Did you name your new airplane the Washco Kid again?
The Washco Kid number 2.
And is that when Goucher changed the name of his to Barbara, I believe?
Yeah, I believe that's what he did call it, yeah. We didn't get to do too much because we didn't get our planes. They just was slow coming in. Most of us went into combat then with about 5 or 6 hours in this P-38. And our first mission was a group mission, and it was led by Colonel Nichols, the 370th Group, And, of course, Herrick was our squadron commander. And then I don't know, I believe a man whose last name started with an H, Hendricks or something like that, was a CO of 402nd or 401st, or I think his name started with an H.
Uh-huh.
And that was our first mission then, those 3 squadrons. And we just took a great big brush into France, turned around and came home. It was just a do-nothing mission. But the funny part about it, I believe that was on a Saturday night, and we were all invited to a dance that night, and here this Colonel Nichols, I don't know whether he's a light colonel or a full bird at that time, but he gave himself the air medal.
He gave himself the air medal?
He got the air medal, yeah.
But how did he get the air medal that way?
Well, you see, a commander can give himself almost anything, and that really pissed the rest of us off.
I bet.
And then we went on we went on quite a few, and then we started breaking up into squadrons going on missions.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the one thing that I was really enthralled about is I believe that we made the second daylight raid over Berlin. Most of the raids were made at night by the British.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that because I believe I logged either 7 hours and 35 minutes or 8 hours and 35 minutes in that P-38. We were the last ones over Berlin because we had the longest range.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the few. Well, the other outstanding mission, we were coming back from one deep into the enemy territory one time.
An escort?
Yeah, we were on an escort, and we was coming back home, and I guess we was at about 20,000 feet, and McNees was leading, and I was his element leader. And he spotted a lonely, I don't know whether it was a Folke or 190, down at about 3,000 feet. And we weren't supposed to leave because we was pretty low on gasoline, but he said, let's go get him, Habbe. And I said, here we go. And we went down and made the first kill of the 370th Fighter Group. So we was clocking over 400 miles an hour when we went down.
Did you split the kill? Did you both share in the kill?
No. I told Mac, I said, drive right up his butt and let him have it.
Well, how did he do it? Did he come up behind him and surprise him?
He just came up behind him, and I guess it was a single fighter. I mean, there wasn't another one in the area. And old Mac just drove right up behind him, and, you know, when you let 450s go on a 40-millimeter cannon, he just disintegrated. Me and Mac both went down and kind of took pictures, you know, because it was hell to get a confirmed kill over there. And then when we got back, well, there was the group commander just about ready to court-martial both of us, you know. And he wouldn't change his mind until he saw those pictures, but we had some good enough pictures that we could confirm the kill.
Did the German pilot bail out, or did he just go straight in?
I just don't remember. I think he went straight on in. I think he must have been killed in the first blast, because you could cut a 12-12 in two with just a 1-second blast of that thing. It was just horrible, the extent of damage you could do with that airplane. The Germans, you know, called that the Folke devil, because we had such terrific power. And you see the other fighters, you find a single-engine fighter, your guns converge, you know, at maybe 200 yards or whatever you want them set at, or 200 yards or 250 yards. But we're firing right out of the nose of that P-38. And there's no veerage or there's no crossover or anything. You can just sit there and tap your rudders back and forth and spray the whole damn world with it almost.
What were the early missions like, or do you remember any other specific early ones up to D-Day?
Well, it was mostly that kind of crap, long-range escort, and I think we went on a few squadron, maybe go out and get a ammunition dump and something like that. I think the heaviest flak we ever saw was that long-range daylight mission over Berlin. You could just almost get out and walk on it. And the Germans never challenged us. You see, about the first 2 weeks, they tried those daylight raids with no fighter protection. And it was nothing for them to go over there with 800 bombers maybe and lose 200 of them. And so they had to do something and do it quick. And so then they usually would take off maybe with the Spitfires, would take them into France. They had the Spitfire and the Hurricane. And then they'd put in the 51 and the P-47 and the 51, and then the P-38 had the longest range. And that's the way she worked.
Didn't you fly some cover missions on D-Day?
Oh, on D-Day I think that was the thing that will remain in my mind the longest. Yeah, we got up about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I guess we were over the target about 4, and it was unbelievable. There was enough ships you could just walk from one to the other almost. And I was fortunate that day to be leading the flight next to the shore at Omaha and Utah beaches. And you could see these poor devils. We were flying at 500 feet, and you could we throttled back, maybe only doing 150 mile an hour, and you could see these poor devils come up in these landing crafts, both tank and let's see, there was about 3 different kinds of landing craft there, and they dropped that door, and the seas were real high, about 6, 7, 8 feet that morning, and they dropped those planks out in front of them, and these guys would just wade off and probably never surface again. If they didn't surface, why, then the Germans were piled up on that hill and about 150 feet in the air and just picked them off like flies. It was the damnedest massacre I believe I ever saw.
And you were flying cover at that time over there?
We're flying cover, yeah. We were to prevent the enemy fighters. We only saw 2, and I was closest to the shore, and I called, I don't know who was leading the mission that day. I imagine Herrick was. And we had some bogeys, I said, at 6 o'clock, but they never came within, he said, if they draw to within a half a mile of you, turn around and meet them. But they cut off at about 1.5 miles, and we never saw another enemy fighter that whole. Well, I believe we flew for 6 hours or something like that, and then we went home and slept for 6 hours and came back again.
When did you first realize that D-Day was coming up? Did they close the base down?
No, the first we realized D-Day was coming is when they painted the various stripes on the wings of all the aircraft. So that's when we knew that D-Day was coming. And me and another guy, we requisitioned a Jeep one time, and we went right down. And, of course, our playgrounds while we were in London was at Brighton on the sea. That was like the Miami of England, you know. And I said, let's requisition a Jeep. Well, we went down there, and you never saw so many god-awful ships and Jeeps and tanks and soldiers, and it was just unbelievable. And we kind of toured through there and looked it all over, and then, of course, then they started painting the stripes on our planes, and then we knew, they didn't tell us, but you knew something big was happening.
After D-Day occurred, I guess you didn't fly too much longer. Tell me about those missions through June.
Well, we kept on going, and after we got done flying the cover, then, if we had any gasoline left at all, why, we would call in to some of the ground boys, and we went for what they call targets of opportunity. And they might say, well, we got 3 tanks here, and we can't get by them, and they gave us the grid coordinates, and we'd go down and blow them out. And maybe we could only spend maybe 30 minutes because we had to keep enough gas to get home. Then we did a lot of, just everything. Most of all of our stuff after D-Day was strafing and dive bombing. Any damn thing that they wanted done, well, we'd do it. Well, right after D-Day, then one time they must have had 50 squadrons, and we took the you wouldn't call it an island, what would you call it? A peninsula of St. Lo.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe it was about every 5 minutes we sent 16 airplanes across that. And we riddled the hell out of them, and they riddled the hell out of us. But
was that St. Lo, or was that at Cherbourg?
Yeah, it was Cherbourg. The Cherbourg Peninsula, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And then, did you ever hear of an island, Arachne?
No, I haven't.
Well, Larson and I was talking about that because I've talked to so many people. Arachne was an island out in the channel. I don't know whether I got that name right. I had a world map, but I don't know what happened to it. But Arachne was an island, and I don't know, maybe it was 5 or 6 miles long and 5 or 6 miles across. And it was all caves. And so they picked about 6 or 7 of us, I believe, and we had the mouths of those caves taped right on our above our knee. And we went over there, and we had 2 napalm bombs on there. We had 2 airplanes, and each one of us had the mouth of a cave to blow those napalm bombs in. And they couldn't get into that island, and it was situated, I believe, just off the Cherbourg Peninsula. I don't know how far out. But we went in there and shot that napalm in there. Napalm, is a fire liquid, and it consumed all the oxygen, and we killed everybody in the caves. And they just marched in and took it over then. I thought that was a hell of a mission, and Larson was the only guy I've ever talked to lately, and he doesn't come to too many reunions. But he was one man. I thought it was a figment of my imagination. After 50-some years, you wonder what in the hell you did and what you didn't do.
You flew some missions there through June and into July. You said before you talked about Lee Goucher and about him being shot down and about his plane and all. Would you talk about that again for me?
Well, I believe Lee was shot down, though, while we were still over in London and on England. I'll tell you, he was shot down on a Sunday, and I didn't go on that mission. But this was unusual as hell because McNees was on that one, and I was the second in command of that flight, see? And so normally I flew McNees's wing, but I don't know why I didn't fly that Sunday. It was on a Sunday, I can tell you that. And they were approaching the coast of France. And normally, if you look behind us, why you wouldn't think anything of about a group of airplanes behind you, because they had B-25s and A-26s and Hurricanes and Spitfires and P-47s. And what happened was they looked behind us and they saw the planes, but they didn't recognize them as Focke-Wulf 190s. And they were 40 of them. And they hit that squadron of 16, and they killed 5 of them. And I believe we got 6 of them, if I remember correctly.
And the pilots were flying into the mission. They weren't returning from a mission?
We were going into a mission, yes. And, of course, the Germans also knew that putting it every Saturday night, the boys went out and got a snoot full of booze, And so that was their main trigger point. But the fact that they came from back behind us, the sun didn't help us, and the fact that we thought they were some other planes coming from England, and so they just ignored them, and all of a sudden here we got 40 enemy on our tails.
Can you talk a little bit more about Lee and what he was like, or what he was like when he flew?
He was just, I was showing my wife here in his picture, he was just the most likable cuss she ever saw. You couldn't help but like him, and his religion is what really got to me, because I'm carnally of that fellow too, that I'm not Catholic. And when he asked me if he could, he said, "Can I get a Catholic crew?" He said, "If I can find them, do you care if I can? I make my whole crew Catholic?" And I said, "Why, not at all. You go out and see whoever you can find." And I think that most of everybody in his crew was Catholic, because I know that every time before we went on a mission, they said they knelt down and prayed. I'm thinking maybe of a guy by the name of Russell Speck, who flew into the side of a hill with an enlisted man. He had a little boy, and they called him Rusty. And she wrote me quite a few letters, because I sent Russell Speck, he was in my flight also. Mm-hmm. And I sent her all his personal belongings back, and she wrote me a letter then, and she had me drop that kid's baby shoes over the place where Speck went down. And I would just love to find that man. I don't know whether Social Security would help me, but that man would be 50 or 55 years old now, and I'd just like to tell him about his dad,
What was his name?
The son was the same as his dad, Russell G. Speck. McNees and all of us. We went to his wedding, and she had that little boy then after he was across the pond. And his nickname was Rusty. And he would probably be Russell G. Speck II.
Would you tell me again about how his father, Speck, how he died?
Well, I can't tell you for sure. Now, I don't know whether he had the group Snoop or not, but he was taking an airplane, and a lot of times when you had a single-engine fighter and you had somebody go along with you, you just had that guy who wasn't flying sit in the seat, and you just sat on his lap, and down the road you went,
Uh-huh.
And so I don't know whether Speck took him over there that way or not, but it was an enlisted man, or maybe he was flying the group Snoop, and that enlisted man was in the plexiglass nose of that group Snoop.
Uh-huh.
But nevertheless, I don't know whether I don't think they were shot down. I think that something happened. They either crashed or he ran into the side of a small hill or something. I don't know really what happened. And nobody else does. But they did find his plane, and I don't know whether they buried the body there or not. I guess that was in France.
Well, back to Lee, you mentioned about what Lee was like, that he would get sick before a mission.
Oh, well, he was just that he had to have that prayer, and that's the reason he wanted his whole crew to be Catholic. I believe there was a crew of 5 that crewed each plane. You had a crew chief and an assistant crew chief, and you had a radio man and an armament man, and I don't know whether you had one other person or not, but I think there was a crew of either 4 or 5. Lee was a very personal. He was, he just exuded an invitation to talk.
Really?
That's just the kind of person I and I was tickled to death to get him, because in our flight we had some, I think we had the greatest flying group of pilots that was ever assembled. And there was about 6 of us, and I don't think that I could have ever wanted anything more. We had this guy by the name of Carpenter who came out of the Royal Air Force, and he came out of Canada, and he was in my flight. And Bobby Jones was in my flight from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Well, Bill Davis is the first one on the big picture with the plane in the background. Bill Davis and I and another guy was picked to go over to Italy and give training to the 99th Fighter Group, which was the all-black group, if you've ever heard of them.
Uh-huh.
Have you heard of them?
Yeah.
And I got stocked in the hospital, so I didn't get to go, but Bill Davis did, and I've forgotten who. I think one of those West Pointers went with him. Then Bill Davis got shot down over France or Belgium, and he bailed out, and he joined the Free French over there, which was against all the rules and regulations. And everybody thought he was dead because nobody heard from him, 4 years ago, he showed up in New Orleans. I didn't know he was alive, and I asked him about it, and he said, I'll tell you something better than that, Hobby. He said, one day the telephone rang, and some big executive or big shot in the government over in France called him up, and they sent him an air ticket for he and his wife, and they had a celebration over there, and just treated them like royalty. And the next is the greatest fighter pilot I ever flew with in my life, Richard McNees. There was nobody could even match him in that whole group standing there, as far as I'm concerned. And that next guy is one of the West Pointers, I think. Agnew was a West Pointer, I'm pretty sure. And then there's Gerwinner, and then there's me, and the next guy is Insulaco. And the next guy, I think his name is Blotter. Yeah. And the next one is Nixick. Take the top man then on the back row with a mustache. That was Carpenter, who came from the Royal Canadian Air Force. And the next guy standing next to him is Radocchio, Raddochia. And the next guy is Goucher. And let's see. I'm unsure of that next person, but the next one to him is Russell Speck. And then there's three guys that I know that one, and I know two of those guys, but I can't think of their names for love nor money. But the end guy then is Bobby Johnson. Now, I don't know whether you got your other picture or not.
Yeah, I do.
Well, you know the Goucher's sitting on the end. I think it was at a dance in London. And I'll tell you the reason why we don't know some of these guys is they were all newcomers, and sometimes they'd throw 7 or 8 or 9 pilots at us at one time, you know. Hell, and weeks later, they weren't alive anymore. Oh, there's Goucher and then Gerwinner. The next one is me, and that's the only ones I know on those first 4. And these other guys are all brand new. They never went overseas with us, I don't think.
Is that bottom one in the center, is that Herrick?
That's Herrick, yeah. God, I didn't recognize that. His face is so full there. Yeah, that's him. And I should know that guy right off to his left with just the head showing, but I don't.
Looks like you've got your hand on his shoulder or his...
Yeah. Well, this Herrick was just wonderful. He was a farm boy from Iowa. And he had 2 little children. He was the old man of the group. I believe he was 27 or 28 years old.
Well, thank you for going through those with me.
And Nichols, you know, he was something else. And
what was he like?
He never went on any missions, you know. Myself and McNees, we escorted Lieutenant General Elwood Quesada, who was the commanding general of the 9th Air Force, you know. We took him on about 3 or 4 missions. Get
into that for me. How did that come about?
I hate to brag, but I think that through Seth McKee, that he knew all about sea flight because he sent us on some of the damnedest missions you ever went on in your life. And, you know, right now the Army and the Navy and the whole outfit, you know, they fly in 2s, you know. They don't fly in 4s and they don't fly in 16s anymore. Well, we got smart 2 over there, and we started flying in just flight formations, 4 people, you know. And you didn't arouse as many people on the ground that way, and you could sneak in better and everything. And he used to come over there, and he would fly McNees's wing, and I would fly the Element then. And we took him on some of the damnedest trips you ever saw. And mostly strafing airports, that kind of stuff. And McNees and I built our own technique on how to fly the fighter, you know. We just, you know, if you were in a Navy bomber, you know, and let's say the actual speed of the thing in level flight was 165 miles an hour, you know, they thought they had to be going 265 to be a dive bomber, you know. And we found out the exact opposite was true. And we would go over a place that we had a dive bomb, and we'd probably go by it. And then we'd turn around, and we'd get our plane down about 150 miles an hour, and then we'd dump it upside down. And at about a 40-degree angle coming into the target, we would put that target between the 2 top 50 caliber machine guns. And as we got down to about 300 feet, we would just pull back on the stick, and as the target went out of our view, we would drop the bombs. And boy, we got to where we could put them almost in the 12-foot circle. And when we went with the general, we seldom, if ever, carried bombs because of the danger, you know. And it's just like Herrick would say, by God, you better come back with this guy.
So he'd fly a 38, huh?
He would fly the P-38, yeah. And I remember one time we went over field, and of course I'm flying the second element, and it's like shooting ducks, you know. You aim at the first duck, and you hit the fourth duck behind him. And that same thing happens in aerial combat, too. And so me and McNees, we jumped on this airport before the Germans even knew we were there. I don't know how many planes we shot up and everything, but the second time around then we approached from a different angle. And then the third time we came through, things were getting damn hot. And so the general said, Red Leader 1, let's go one more time. And so I just pulled underneath his wing and shot off about a half a second burst, you know, and those tracers kept come underneath his wing. And then I called Red Leader and I said, I think we better get the hell out of here. And I just wanted him to know. He didn't know that I thought, I'll change your mind real quick. And we were just clearing the field. And I just gave him a short burst right underneath his wing. Yeah, and then several times we caught the Germans backing up and pulling out, you know. And I remember one time there was 4 of us. We had napalm.
Was that? No, this wasn't with Quesada, was it?
No, this wasn't with Quesada, but there was 4 of us, and we caught a German troops leaving the scene, and we caught them on the main road, and they had horse-drawn artillery, and we had this napalm. So we'd go down, drop one bomb, and we'd come in, you know, maybe about 30 feet off the road, and just skip that bomb in there, and that bomb would go for maybe a block and a half, and just throw that napalm, and anything that napalm touches, you know, it burns you to death right there. But it's like a jellied gasoline. Those horses then would take off. They'd have that napalm on their back and burn them to death, and they'd take off. You never saw such a horrible thing in your life. And all the troops then would scatter off to the side of the road, and we never bothered them much. We were mainly interested in getting their tanks, you know, and their horse-drawn artillery and all that stuff. But we were still in France yet, I believe, when they were retreating. Those were some of the missions, and then blowing up the trains was a lot of fun, you know. You hit that old locomotive and see that steam all go up. And ammunition dumps, and we did a lot of crazy things, too. This Carpenter I was telling you from the Royal Canadian Air Force, when we was over in England, he came to me one day and he said, Habbe, there's a guy down here who's got a great big fenced-in pasture, about 3 acres, and he's got 2 deer in there and some swans and everything. And I said, do you know the swans belong to the Queen and the deer belong to the King? And he said, I don't care who they belong to. I'm from upstate New York, and I'm going to go get one of them. Can you imagine this now? So he came one night, and he said, I want you to requisition a Jeep for me. And I said, okay. And he had his carbine. And he went out there with a bunch of sugar lumps and cut a hole in the fence, and that deer came up, and he shot it and loaded it up in that thing, and about 11 o'clock at night, he gets me out of bed. And he's got this damn deer in the back of that Jeep. And so we made a tripod, and we strung it up, and we skinned it, dug a hole, and let everything else go in there. And boy, you ought to have seen the papers in that area the next day. Oh, I don't know how we ever got out of that, but I told that to Seth, the general, one time, and down New Orleans, and I remember that. He said, you talk about hell.
And those did belong to royalty?
Well, that's what they told us. They said the deer all belong, but nevertheless, you know, just going to somebody's, this guy had a big estate somewhere around there. I don't know where it was. One day we didn't have any whiskey, so we took the group snoop, and Carpenter says, I'll fly up to Scotland and get you some whiskey. So we all gave him $100 apiece, and he gets in that group snoop, and of course he's got to stop off in London and see the girls. And then from London, he flew on up to Ireland, and he loaded that thing down with Scotch whiskey. And he came back to London again. Then on his way back, he picked up this old, nice-looking girl. And you won't believe this story, but it's true. And he sticks her in the front nose of that group snoop and flies her over to a combat zone. He brought her over for her to take care of us boys over there. And I didn't think anything about it, you know, and we all had bicycles, and so he landed and everything, and I thought, well, I'll go over there, and he let her out. I didn't see him let her out, you know, and she's walking down with spiked heels and shoes and everything, and I said, Parlez-vous français? And she says, oh, shut up and speak English. Then, you know, I immediately went to commanding officer, and I said, Carpenter comes back with this gal. he said, "For Jesus Christ, what else can that man get into, you know?" And so he said, "Well, he's got to take her back." And so the next day he put her in that Group Snoop and landed on the first airfield he could, and she jumped out, and he flew it back. And they tried to catch him with a couple of Spitfires, but they never did. He dumped that woman off, you know, and she'd been in the combat zone, you know. He could have got court-martialed and he maybe even shot. He just don't do those things. But Carpenter did. I said, "What are we going to do with him?" To Herrick, and Herrick said, "I don't know what they'll do to him." I said, "Give him Officer of the Day for about a month." So that was his punishment for that. But he was wild, and he was always into something, you know, and you'd take him on a flight, you know, and you'd call him, and maybe he was leading your element or something, and he wouldn't answer, you know. So you'd go over there and bump into him, you know. Lots of times you want to get somebody's attention, you just take your wing and try to flip him over, even though you're going 200 mile an hour.
Yeah.
And he wouldn't have his radio turned on. I don't know what he was thinking, but you never could get him on the radio. Just forget about even trying. And so I get back and I'd say, "Carpenter, damn you, what in the hell didn't you answer me?" He says, "Radio won't work." And so I go get his radio man. I said, "What's the matter with that radio?" He said, "Nothing. Carpenter won't turn it on." But we had some dinglings. This Bobby Johnson was a crackerjack fighter pilot. You just had to stick your neck out to be a good fighter pilot. That's all there was to it. And we had some guys that could do it. But we stayed in the French Chateau, you know, during the Battle of the Bulge, and we was on the third floor of this big chateau. We had no heat up there, and so we slept in. We had wonderful sleeping bags, and we had this what they called a great room up there. It must have been about 30 by 40 feet, and the boys all play poker in the center of it, and we had one little stinking light, and the rest of us would sit on the outskirts in, and we'd go to these little breweries around there and get us an ambulance full of champagne, and we'd drink champagne. You didn't need to cool it because it was sitting right in the room, and well, it was 15 above in the room. And then one night they was playing poker, and 2 German night fighters came over and blowed that whole room all to pieces, and killed one guy and shot one guy's leg off. And they made 2 passes at us, and that was a night you will not forget. McNees was on a mission, and he was shot down. And when he landed, he broke his leg. So he hobbled over, and he found 2 trees that were about 8 feet apart. And he cut the shrouds off his parachute, and he made him a real strong rope. And then he put that rope around the tree facing the tree that he was looking at, and tied one end around his ankle. And then he tied his body to the other tree, and he pulled on that rope until that leg popped into place.
You're kidding.
No, sir.
And he had broken his leg, so he set the leg himself.
He set the leg himself, using, you know, it was sort of a, you can imagine the power, you know, that he had by wrapping that around that other tree, you know. And then a Belgian boy saw him fall. He didn't fall, but saw him come down, and he went over, and after he'd snapped his leg in place, and he hit him in the barn loft for about 6 weeks, I believe. And then the American troops came through, and he walked back and came back to our squadron. They only let him have a day with us, and he told us all the stories and everything else. And, well, then they wanted to discharge him after he came back from being through the lines. And he said, by God, he wasn't going. He could fly as good as any of them. And I believe they even took him up. And he just whipped the hell out of whoever got him engaged in flying.
Uh-huh.
So this guy could fly upside down better than he could any other way. He was just, and the other thing, the crazy thing this Carpenter did, they had another little town there, and I've forgotten the name of it, but this was right around where that Belgian estate was. And they had about a mile of narrow gauge railroad track, and they had a little steam engine. I guess it was about 8 feet tall and maybe 12 feet long. And so Carpenter says, I know all about steam engines. So he said, come go along with me. So we fired it up, and I don't know where in the hell we got the water, but we filled the boiler, and we fired her up, and we got her going. And so we're playing with this. I don't know whether I believe we had 1 car or 2 cars maybe. They used it to haul coal from that mile. Anyway, he called me one morning. He said, let's go take a train ride. And I said, okay. So we went and fired her all up, and we'd back her up, and wind her up, see how fast she'd go, And Carpenter says, it's going to be the last trip on the train. I said, what are we going to do? And he said, we get about a block away from it had this great big huge embankment build up,
Mm-hmm.
And so Carpenter says, you stay on one side, and I'm going to say, when I say jump, you jump. And so he said jump, and I jumped, and he jumped, and when he jumped, he pulled that throttle all the way out. And that train started picking up speed, and it hit the end of that and just blew into 1,000 pieces. He just thought that was the greatest thing that ever happened. So those were some of the really damn crazy things that he could think up of anything,
Yeah.
And we treated the enlisted men. Every mission you flew, you got 2 ounces of whiskey.
Mm-hmm.
And we wouldn't drink our whiskey because sometimes we might fly 3 missions a day. Well, hell, 6 ounces of whiskey. I don't care what anybody says. When you're flying a high-speed airplane, you better be on your tips. And we'd save that up then, and we'd have a big party and dance for the enlisted men and their girlfriends. And once in a while, we also went out and we shot a heifer or 2 and took it over to the Army. We dressed it out and took it over to the Army. They ground it all up into hamburgers. And then we'd dig somebody's potato patch, and we'd have hamburgers and French fries. But it was rugged living over there. We lived in just the worst conditions, I guess. We lived just like the Army did.
Mm-hmm.
We drew our rations from the Army and everything else. I can tell you one mission about 3 days before the Battle of the Bulge. I had a flight of 4, and we went, let's see, that would be east, I guess, into Germany. Anyway, we went over close to the Rhine River, and we tore up a couple of bridges, and I don't know what else went. And then we got in a little valley coming back, and that valley, let's see, that was south. We were headed west then in that little valley, and we came to another valley then, and it ran north and south. And I said, well, let's go to you got a lot of kick out of flying real low, because if you flew under 500 feet over the States or any place else, you throw you in the pokey. So we'd do our buzzing down there, and that's the fun out of flying the fighter. You don't have any idea of the speed until you see something standing still. And so then we turned right into another valley, and we hadn't gone up there more maybe a mile or 2, and we surprised a bunch of Germans. I'd say a full company of Germans in tanks, and they quickly covered up all their tanks with white sheets and covered themselves up with white sheets. And so I asked my wingman, I said, did you see that down there? And they said, yeah. So we didn't think anything about it, and we went on back home and went in the intelligence officer, and we told him what we saw. And he said, I believe you guys been in combat too long. And here they were preparing for the Battle of the Bulge. And they never paid any attention to us. And then, if I'm not mistaken, Larson came in after I did later that afternoon. And he told them the same damn thing. He was out there playing around coming home. And they still didn't believe him either. Well, the next night or so, we had the Battle of the Bulge.
So you saw them getting in place?
We saw them when they were assembling. They had tanks. I imagine this is the company, about 300 men.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know how many tanks they had, but we surprised them so much that they didn't have everything covered up yet.
Anything you can remember about the Bulge and about...
Well, I guess we were less than a mile from the Battle of the Bulge. I don't know what it looks like on a map. Is it greater than that?
Well, some reports say like 12 miles or 15 miles is the furthest advance, but really the German advance through the Bulge was the main advance of the Germans was coming straight at Florence.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you that, the bad weather set in there, I believe, the next day after I was telling you about this trip through the valley. And our planes were all grounded, and they brought in about 50 big 4x4 trucks. And then each one of our planes had a dynamite stick on the end of the wings. If they got any closer, if I remember correctly, they advanced almost within 2 miles of Florence. It might have been closer than that. But anyway, they said, don't leave these planes here, blow them all up. And, of course, they held. They never got that to us. But and then I flew a couple of missions that were just, dive bombing and strafing and stuff like that. And then they also had the Malmedy massacre, right there. That one time you were 35 missions and you could go home as a fighter pilot. And then it went to 50. And after the squadron got so depleted, they didn't give a damn if you had 100 missions, you wasn't going home. And I guess it was maybe about 2 weeks after that me and Kennedy got drunk, and we had to go see Lieutenant General Quesada. And he fined us both $100 in the severe reprimand. And he asked us why we got drunk, and we said, well, we're the last two of the original 485th Squadron members over here, and we've been to the Happy Farm one time. And by God, we think it's time for us to go home, but they keep telling us we don't have any experienced pilots. We don't have any experienced pilots. He promised us then that if we'd be good boys, why, we had to come to 9th Air Force and do 2 weeks of plotting, and then he'd send us home, and they did.
When was that you got to come home?
Well, when was the Bulge? About the middle of December?
Yeah, about the 20th to around that time.
Well, just add about 2 weeks to that, and that's about when we came home. I believe I flew 2 missions or 3 missions right after the skies cleared, and then I came home, and then we got drunk and Quesada gave us hell.
Was that just at the base where you partied? Was that?
No, hell, we were in some little town, and we had to be off streets at 11 o'clock. These MPs picked us up, and they was going to take us to the pokey, and we had our 45 strapped on because we was that close to the Battle of the Bulge, you know. Normally we didn't wear them, and we were really crocked up, and we told them, you're not taking us to any pokey, you know. So they said, you wait here, and they had a field telephone with them. They called their CO, and he said, we but a couple of captains here. They're drunk as a skunk, and they won't come in. And this guy said, well, you better leave them alone, then. But boy, did we hear about it. Oh, man, I mean, they were walking on the right-hand side. One of them was walking on the right side me, and one of them was walking beside Kennedy. He was walking on the right side. Well, an enlisted man never walks on the right-hand side of an officer. And so they had that all written down. I told that one sergeant, I said, God damn, haven't you had enough Army training to know you're not supposed to walk on the right-hand side of an officer? They had that all written down there. Oh, that's when I should have spoken up, you know, and said, look, buddy, I took you on some missions that you probably had never seen that much combat in your lifetime. But I didn't. As I said before, Kennedy and I both went to the flak farm. Well, didn't amount to a damn. It was 5 days at the flak farm. You took 1 day to get there and 1 day to come back, and so you had 3 days of sitting on your butt with some stupid psychiatrist telling you what was wrong with you. He didn't need to tell us. We were worn out.
Yeah.
And Kennedy and I, we lost the Distinguished Flying Cross. We also lost the Cross of War, the Croix de Guerre from France.
What do you mean you lost it?
Well, we lost it because we weren't there.
Oh, so you didn't...
We've taken our punishment, and the French came through there, and they said we want the 2 pilots that had the most experience and done the most good for our country. And some guy by the name of Crouch, he got it, and he was a squadron commander. And we lost our Distinguished Flying Cross, I believe because we got crocked up.
Oh, so that's why.
Yeah. You know, the military is a suck organization. And I don't care what, you can ask anybody about it, you know. If you want to get ahead in the military, why, all you got to do is pat the right ass and you're up there. And that's the way it goes. Yeah, if you want to get promoted, you do that, you know. But when I came back from overseas, I was fortunate. I ran into a full bird colonel, commander of McCord Field, and he wasn't like that. And that's the one, he said, I'm promoting you to major. He said, how come it took you so long to get captain? And I said, every damn time we get a promotion put in, the guy'd get killed. Our squadron commander would get killed. Hell, I don't know how many times Kennedy and I went in for captain and we never went through because next day the commander wasn't there. I don't know how many squadron commanders we had. I bet you we had 6 or 7, or maybe more than that. I don't even remember their names anymore. And that's the reason when I met him the first time down in New Orleans, you know, everybody was crowding around him, you know. So they're still sucking, you know, and hell, they don't have to suck anymore. And so I just went up and said, Seth, how you doing? And oh boy, he's an enlisted man. He was standing next to me, and after we left, and we went and got us a beer, and he said, "Do you know you just walked up and called that man Seth?" And I said, "He's no better than I am. He's just a civilian." I said, "The fact that he was a lieutenant, 3-star general, don't make a damn to me." And then I came back home and became a public relations officer in McCord Field, Washington. I couldn't stand the waste that was in the United States. It was the Army Air Corps then. And but they offered me a regular commission. I was in the commission in the reserves then. And they offered me a regular Army. They promoted me to major, and I left 30 days before I got my promotion. I had enough of that. And, they offered to send me to command and staff school. And I guess I passed up the chance of a lifetime. But I just couldn't stand any part of I still can't stand it. I worked at a little town of Muscuda, which is about 30 miles away from here, for 37 years. And they're only 6 miles from Scott Field. And I used to do a lot of work over in Scott Field as a jeweler, and the waste never stops, They've got hospital gowns over out in the East Coast that are from World War I, they're still storing them. Crazy things like that, When I was at McCord Field, Washington, they sent us 500,000 rounds of ammunition, and we didn't have any guns to shoot it in. Just crazy thing. I wanted to tell you another little story about Harry Truman was with the Senate Investigating Committee at Westover Field. Well, and I don't know whatever became of his committee, but when I came back from overseas and everything, by that time he was president of the United States, and he was the first president ever to visit a permanent air base in the Northwest. And so he came to McCord Field, which is the only permanent air base in the Northwest. And so I got to meet him again then. He came down the stairs, and of course they had Fort Lewis, Washington is just almost right next to McCord Field. And they had all the generals over there, and they had to stand in line as far as their rank was concerned. And here's poor little old Captain Habbe down the end. And the old Harry didn't pay a hell of a lot of attention to him, but Harry was a captain in World War I. And he came down to me and he said, saw my ribs, and he said, "You've been around a little bit, haven't you, Captain?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "I got a job for you." And I said, "What's that, sir?" And he said, "You're going to take this pilot and my co-pilot up there, and you're going to show them a good time for the next 2 nights." And boy, you talk about 2 raunchy pilots. They were it.
Oh, were they?
Oh, yeah. And I thought it was unusual as hell, Harry Truman was always sort of like one of my idols, too. And then to have the privilege to meet him, and shake hands with him and all that stuff.
I heard that the reason he was pretty obscure, but the reason he got the nomination for vice president in 44 was just because of his work on that committee.
Yeah, it was called a Senate Investigation Committee, and he really did a hell of a job. He didn't give a damn. He was a senator then, but he didn't have the power. But he was so earthy, that you wanted to tell him everything you knew. I had some guys that spun in out there in Westover from good friends of mine, and they just didn't give that airplane time. And of course, as I said before, Yeager broke the sound barrier. But we broke it long before he did, but we didn't know it. They called it compressibility in those days.
Well, I do appreciate so much you taking the time to talk to me about these things.
Well, I've enjoyed it, and I thank you. I thank you especially for these pictures.
Sure.
My daughter just went ape over them, and her husband is he's got his private pilot license, but he just eats up this history of this flying. They just can't believe it,